rapidly evolving trends in cloud networking and cloud-native security. Our sense of security is deeply ingrained. For centuries, we understood that if a house has doors, you lock them. So if your business network has an entry point, you install a firewall. But bring your own device, and wireless connectivity have exploded the number of entry points. And in today's connected world, every single device or application could be an entry point. If the network periphery goes fractal, where do you put your security? This is the theme of the following discussion, led by Futuriom Principal Analyst Scott Raynovich. Scott is joined by Kevin Deerling, Senior Vice President of Marketing, Mellanox Technologies, Kelly Ahuja, the CEO of Versa Networks, and M.K. Palmore, Field CSO, Palo Alto Networks. But first, let's hear from Scott.
I'm Scott Raynovich, and I've followed this industry for about, afraid to say, almost 3 decades now. But Futuriom is an independent research firm, and we focus really on cloud infrastructure, networking, and security as it applies to those things, and really focus on gathering end user data. I spend probably half my time talking to end users and doing surveys, survey every other month to find out what their challenges are and what they're looking for. Of course, we're all hearing about cloud and networking and security. What are the issues here? Well, the biggest issue is the cloud, as we heard on other panels, has changed everything, right? It's changed traffic patterns, behaviors, network architectures. All the traffic's, or most of the traffic's going to the cloud now. It used to be in a self-contained world of a corporate WAN or a LAN, and now it's everybody's hitting things in the cloud. This is creating more bandwidth demand overall, of course. It also requires a more flexible architecture. You can't just install a firewall and have that be your security. You have to have security apps distributed throughout wherever your users are going. There's another challenge, which is appliance sprawl. You used to have one gateway or switch or router, and now you have hundreds of different kinds of devices with different characteristics and different protocols. That's a challenge. And it's going up the stack into the software layer. We have orchestration tools and visibility tools. And so these are kind of all the things that the network and IT managers are struggling with, just kind of a multi-pronged challenge. And if you look at the way networks work now, it used to be very simple. You had a corporate office and a data center and branches, and you'd connect them all and lock them all down. But now people are going all over the place, right? They're going to hit cloud services from their home. They're going back through data centers to go to the cloud service. They're connecting to cloud gateways. So the way we connect and what we're connecting to has become more complex. We talked about MPLS versus internet. Are you using a private MPLS network? Are you using a business quality internet? Are you using home broadband? So all these are considerations into how we secure the network, right? And so I was looking at some interesting architectural diagrams. Brings us to the next challenge. This is a NIST view of cloud architecture. The question is, where do you put security, right? There's so many of these different technology layers and architectures. Well, the answer is you have to put it everywhere, right? You have to look at the security at every layer of the network, every layer of the cloud. Brings us to the next problem is, this is a highly reduced slide, okay? This slide could really be 100x as big, but this is just a few of the technology tools that CISOs have to look at when they look at all those layers in the NIST diagram. Are you talking about your endpoints? Are you talking about the container security inside the data center? Are you talking about the firewall at the edge? Are you talking about, there's literally hundreds of tools that these CISOs have to look at and evaluate to attack these specific problems. So I know you guys love to sell technology, but if you look at the end user perspective, it's literally overwhelming. They're looking at their screens, they have dozens of tools, thousands of alerts are popping up, their heads are exploding, right? And that's the main problem with security, is not that we don't have these tools to stop it, it's the human management of dealing with them. And this is the trend. The trend is, it's a management issue, right? It's not a technology issue. If you look at all the major breaches, whether it's Target or Chase or the IRS or Equifax, it almost always leads back to a human error. Either there were things that were flagged that weren't paid attention to, or there were decisions made not to invest to patch web servers. And so it's really an organizational issue as much as a technology issue. Heard a lot about SD-WAN, so I'm going to just go over this real quick because that was all about SD-WAN. But basically, the way I view SD-WAN and why it's helping security is it kind of makes encryption and VPN and secure networks default rather than having to set them up separately, automates them. And when we survey our audience, almost every single survey I've done this year, I would say security pops up as the #1 thing, whatever you're talking about, some cloud infrastructure, cloud networking. We did this SD-WAN survey. We asked 136 service providers in enterprise what's driving their SD-WAN implementation, and better security came out on top. I mean, that's not to say all the other benefits of SD-WAN that you've heard about are important.
Scott introduces Kevin Deerling.
Yeah, so I'm the Senior VP of Marketing at Mellanox Technologies. We're a high-speed networking company. We do NICs, switches, smart NICs, and everything I've been hearing today, it's interesting. They're talking about security, and it's always secure the network because the attacks are coming from outside. But more and more in the cloud model, they're coming from inside because the cloud model invites third parties that are potentially untrusted right into the middle of your data center. So that old security model of perimeter protection is not adequate. It's important, but it's not adequate. And so we're really about addressing those limitations.
Next, MK Palmore.
I'm a field CSO with Palo Alto Networks. I just joined Palo Alto Networks this year after finishing up a 22-year career with the FBI. And so the conversation that you were having earlier on about threats and adversarial approaches to environments certainly was something that I could have weighed in on. In my current role at Palo Alto Networks, part of what I do is get out and evangelize quite a bit on the subject of the changing nature of security. And at Palo Alto Networks, we're concentrating on one, securing what we consider to be the old school approach through the presence of our next-gen firewall, but we also have a decided eye towards the future as it relates to cloud security and certainly issues around SOAR products and automation. And so what we see is the high complexity in the changing nature of cybersecurity, and at Palo Alto Networks, we're moving towards making sure that we have a product line that answers the mail on those issues. So looking forward to the discussion on cloud.
Finally, Kelly Ahuja, CEO Versa Networks.
Security is something that is fundamental to any network, and you cannot separate network and security apart any longer. This is not just true in the wide area network, and SD-WAN clearly isn't happening without security. Security is a big concern for whether it's enterprises or providers, even inside the network. Because the old model of how you do VLANs and zone-based firewalls is just not scaling. It's operationally, because if that was the second part of your question, Scott, was really about management, and that's becoming very complex. So whether it's in the data center, creating segments to be able to isolate applications because they can become threat vectors, or in an enterprise or a branch where printers can become threat vectors, you got to protect all of that, even inside the enterprise, not just outside the enterprise. So security is going to be indeed pervasive across every environment. And the edge as we knew it, the network perimeter as we knew it, was really about the external edge. But in the future, it's going to be about internal perimeters, and everything is going to have to get protected in every possible way.
Excellent. Well, that kind of brings up to my next point, as we were talking earlier about encryption. And I know Kevin will have a lot to say about this because Mellanox has done a lot of work here. But networks traditionally have been a barrier sometimes to security because of the overhead of encryption, and you can't, you would like to encrypt everything, but sometimes it incurs a performance hit. So tell us, let's talk about the trend towards encrypting data in networks and whether networks can keep up with the security demand.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. You know, we just introduced a new network adapter product that performs encryption at 200 gigabits per second line rate. And so we do this for point-to-point encryption with IPsec. We do it for, you know, TLS, so that's sort of the transport layer. And we encrypt data at rest on the hard drives. So the point here is this is going to become ubiquitous technologies. Today, normally you have an encrypted secure tunnel from the client, what we call north-south traffic from the client into the data center in the cloud. But once it's in the cloud, then people are assuming that's a trusted model. And inside, it's not encrypted. It's just no longer true. You're bringing bad guys right into the middle of the cloud. You're charging them to put their workloads into your cloud, and you have no control over what those workloads are. So we're seeing two of our major customers now adopt encryption inside of their no longer trusted, we heard the zero trust model. We're seeing two major cloud and sort of household name companies that unfortunately I can't name, are customers that are going to deploy security inside of their data center, and everything will be secured so that even if the network is compromised internally, the data will all be encrypted.
First panel, we heard that we should all use a VPN. How many people use a VPN on a daily basis? How many people like log in from internet Wi-Fi in the hotel here and do not use a VPN? See, yeah, so I've been trained, you know, after hearing 100 of these panels to use a VPN. I use it all the time now. But as we can see, it was almost like half the people are being exposed to this dirty Wi-Fi right now. So it's clear that it's still encryption and VPNs are not, you know, default, you know, so MK, tell us Palo Alto's view on what do you guys encrypt? How much will we encrypt years from now? Does everything have to be massively encrypted?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're touching on lots of subjects. I would say that now in terms of a best practice, encryption certainly has risen to the level of being a considerable best practice in terms of data at rest and also data in transit. And so I think we will continue to see high levels of the use of encryption, largely because we have to understand from the approach of the adversary that any opportunity that the adversary has to access data means that it's an opportunity for them to infiltrate and then subsequently monetize the access to that data. And so this idea around encryption, again, I would put in a bucket with the cybersecurity fundamentals, meaning let's get to closing down every avenue of approach that we can in terms of preventing the adversary's opportunity to monetize both access to information and the information itself.
Great, thanks. Kelly, you got something to add?
Yeah, so clearly encryption is going to happen, and we have to give the ability to everyone to be able to do it where they want it and when they want it. So for example, if I'm using in the wide area network an MPLS service, well, do I need to use encryption on top of that? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But that's an option that should be a settable thing for the end administrator to be able to figure that out. Our job isn't to determine where encryption's got to be used. Our job is to be able to provide ability to encrypt wherever a customer needs it. Now, clearly, when you're in a data center at a 200 gig interface, you do need hardware assist. And if there is hardware assist available, every system should use that to do it, because that's going to give you the best performance. But in smaller systems, even for white box designs that have hardware assist, because some chip that Intel's provided does something or the other, you've got to be able to use it, and you've got to be able to use it efficiently, because it's going to improve performance. But that said, encryption is something that's coming everywhere. In fact, if you look at Wi-Fi 6, there's also a WPA3 standard that's coming out, which has a WPA3 OWE. And that OWE stands for Optional Wireless Encryption, where they're actually going to be using encryption even in the Wi-Fi domain to be able to provide that connectivity. So encryption is going to happen, and I think it's going to happen everywhere.
Yeah, can I just jump in and respectfully disagree that hardware assist is sufficient? So hardware assist is some of these extensions they have in the Intel CPU that actually can do the decryption in software, and it accelerates that. However, if you look at all the other things that we've heard talked about today with overlay networks and virtual machines and hypervisors that switch between the virtual machines, all of that is actually being done in network hardware today, in the network adapters, steering the traffic to the correct virtual machines, terminating TCP/IP and accelerating that with checksum offloads, et cetera. If you use software to decrypt the packet, all of those things break. All of the hardware accelerators that companies like ourselves have put into the network interface cards over the last 20 years all break, because when you have an encrypted connection, all of the information we need to look at overlays and TCP/IP headers and checksums, all of it becomes encrypted because there's a giant IPsec tunnel. We don't see any of it. All of our accelerations break. So I don't actually think that hardware acceleration in the CPU, and Kelly didn't say that he was specifically talking about that, but I actually think it needs to be in line in the network adapter.
We can agree to disagree, but.
That's why it's a debate.
Excellent. Yeah, let's cause some more tension. There's not enough tension. So we have a traditionally known as a firewall vendor. I don't know if you guys still call yourselves that, but and then you have an SD-WAN vendor, but the SD-WAN vendors to me are sounding more like firewall vendors these days, you know, talking about their security stacks and their next generation firewalls, passing these great NSS tests that we heard about. And then the firewall vendors are, it seems like now I get a couple press releases a day with a firewall vendor with SD-WAN in the headline. So why don't you guys just team up and all merge and just be one? Isn't it the same thing now?
We're doing a little bit of that. You may or may not know as an audience, Palo Alto Networks has gone through the process of acquiring several sort of best-of-breed entities over the past 18 months or so in an effort to align with what is our vision of what the future looks like. And it does involve a little bit of consolidation in terms of what the industry looks like. We've aligned and we still put resources behind the idea behind the next-gen firewall. We think firewalls will remain present both in physical and virtual form in environments. Our added caveat to that is that we think firewall should deliver a number of services to our customers. In other words, you should be able to turn on and off services with the presence of the firewall. We also are doubling down on the concept that most enterprises are in some way, shape, or form in the process of a cloud journey. We understand that most enterprises understand the efficiencies that they can leverage from the cloud and are moving to use it. And so in our acquisitional phases, we've acquired companies that provide security around access to your digital information in the cloud, regardless of where you happen to be on the planet. And the third phase of that we like to think of as sort of the cybersecurity of the future, which we believe involves a tremendous amount of automation because most enterprises certainly cannot scale from a workforce standpoint to what's needed in the cybersecurity industry, and so we feel that automation is going to play a large role in that. And we are, in addition to automation, kind of doubling down on this issue about cyber threat intelligence. This idea that no one entity sees the entirety of the threat landscape, but if you use a patchwork approach and sort of cobble together visions of the landscape, you can extract data and information that enables you to provide security services to your customer base from a wide variety of sources.
Yeah, so what about you, Kelly? Do you need the Palo Alto guys around, or are you just going to
well,
do it all yourself?
When a market is hot, Scott, everybody tries to go after it and try to attach their stuff into that market. And every one of the incumbents, including others that have been on stage during the last couple of days, have tried to do that. But candidly, this is a new space which requires new ground-up innovation. when it comes to SD-WAN. Candidly, our approach has been not to really drive a kind of a certain specific direction for the customer, but give a customer an option. We're an open platform. We have many customers that use us right beside Palo Alto. We actually can sit beside a physical Palo Alto, or we can take a virtual Palo Alto VNF and put that onto our software and service chain that together. We can do that with Fortinet. We can do that with Riverbed, Silver Peak, Cisco, you name it. WAN optimization companies, security companies, it doesn't matter. The key thing, though, is you have to solve the customer's problem, and most of the customers have an existing environment where you have to fit in and be able to allow them to have a smooth migration. Whether they move to a cloud or stay on-prem, it's really going to be their call, and every customer is going to be different. You're not going to have one recipe that applies for everyone, and you got to give them the flexibility to do it. You've got to have the versatility, and that's where the name Versa comes from, to be able to allow them to do that.
There's time for a question from Anthony Caruana from CSO Magazine, Australia.
I'm kind of a little bit interested in the encryption sort of comments you all made. Isn't encryption just table stakes now? Isn't it like just what we expect? Because we saw lots of data over the last few days pointing to some fairly significant data breaches, lots of data is being stolen, and in almost all those cases, there's some encryption in these people's systems. Don't the bad guys just walk around? Because eventually, the data's got to be unencrypted at some point to be useful. So, you know, I accept that we need encryption, but with people trying to make it sound like it's the answer, but it's just like one small hurdle really for a determined bad guy.
What you mentioned I guess this TLS thing. You were saying, Kevin, earlier this morning when we were talking that these web scale vendors don't actually encrypt some of the server-to-server traffic. So that's a vulnerability, correct?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, security is typically still on the edge. As much as people talk about encryption, and I'm using encryption here, security is much broader, I agree. But today, most of the data within the data center is in clear text. And so if you can deliver encryption and decryption at line rate with zero penalties in terms of performance, and penalties in the sense of the CPU, the most expensive part of your data center infrastructure is the CPU and the memory subsystem in your servers. And of course the storage itself, the flash. Those are the expensive things. If you can encrypt everything that's moving and everything that's at rest constantly, eventually you're going to have clear text to the application. And now you just need to make sure that those applications are constrained, that the service provider policy and the security policies are in place and they can't be compromised. That's where the SmartNIC comes into play, that actually puts a computer in front of the computer to actually ensure that we'd love to have all of these guys' security policies running on SmartNICs so that they didn't even have to run on x86. Compromise the x86, who cares? There's a separate security domain that's protecting by putting a computer in front of the computer with the SmartNIC. So that's the vision we see. We think that's where the market's going. Some of the big hyperscale guys are already there.
Let me add a different twist to this. You mentioned sort of in the preface of your question, you talked about how, you know, encryption thing, I'm assuming you're saying it can't be the complete answer, and I would absolutely agree with you. If you look at adversarial approaches, if you look at successful breaches, nearly 100% of them have some component of a violation of just plain cybersecurity fundamentals. Many people ask, okay, what are those fundamentals? You pick out an easy example, one I like to utilize quite a bit, the CIS 20 critical security controls. If you go through the postmortem of nearly every breach, certainly the high-profile ones that have happened over the past few years, the infiltration method, the point of access, the threat vector utilized by the adversary is always about the fundamentals. And so for as long as security and network defenders, as long as we have an absence of the fundamentals, as long as we leave sort of the easy low-hanging fruit available to adversaries, they will continue to pound on this. These folks are experts at return on investment. They're going to take the easiest path available to them to gain access to networks. And so, yes, we can have lots of conversations about things like encryption, but encryption, quite frankly, is a subset of some of the basic things that we need to be doing in order to secure environments.
Yeah, I completely agree with MK. Encryption, while is a technique, it's not the answer, full answer. You need many different things. And certainly encryption in the data center is a good thing. No one's going to argue that. But if you take a look at an enterprise that's got printers and devices that are connected, it may not be possible for them to use encryption in those devices because they've been around for a while. So you have to have multiple different types of solutions to be able to address that. Secondly, a lot of threats come from not just from somebody being able to listen to the network, but your user identity. So identity brokers and somebody taking that on is also a concern. So when it comes to security, it's a multifaceted, multi-layered, multi-segmented approach that you have to take.
So security has to be everywhere, and it needs to be a patchwork of many approaches, and that can only be managed with a lot of automation. But one final important point: security everywhere must include security in the workforce itself. When bored or distracted under pressure, humans can be the weakest link in the security chain. On the other hand, alert, informed, and disciplined employees add up to the network's strongest security overlay. Many thanks to Scott Raynovich of Futuriom, Kevin Deerling, Senior VP of Marketing at Mellanox Technologies, Kelly Ahuja, the CEO of Versa Networks, and MK Palmore, Field CSO, Palo Alto Networks. And thank you for listening to this NetEvents podcast. A full transcript is available from www.netevents.org.